one point in time, Omni-Man was one of the most hated characters in modern animation, and honestly, it made sense. He lied to his family, he betrayed the planet that trusted him, and when the truth came out, he didn't just turn on humanity, he almost destroyed it. The guardians of the globe slaughtered, entire cities reduced to rubble, innocent lives gone in seconds. And then there's that one moment, the train, where he forced his own son to watch people die, using his body as a shield like a weapon, while telling him that human lives are meaningless. For most of us, that's where the conversation ended. Omni-Man wasn't complicated, he was misunderstood. He was evil, but that's also the easiest conclusion to come to, because it allows us to separate ourselves from him, to say, I would never do that, to believe that people like Omni-Man are simply monsters and nothing more. But what if that's not true? What if Omni-Man isn't misunderstood because people don't know what he did, but because they refuse to understand why he did it? Because the reality is, Omni-Man was never meant to be human. From the moment he was born, Nolan wasn't raised to be compassionate. He wasn't taught empathy. He wasn't taught to value life the same way humans do. He was raised as a Viltrumite, a special species built on one core belief: strength is everything. Weakness is not something you protect, it's something you eliminate. We see this clearly when Nolan explains Viltrumite history to Mark. Half the population wiped out their own kind just to ensure that only the strongest remained. Think of that. This isn't a culture that values growth or kindness or morality. This is a culture that equates power with purpose. And Nolan didn't just grow up in that system, he succeeded in it. He became one of its greatest soldiers. So when he comes to Earth, it's not as a protector, it is as an agent of an empire. His mission is simple: integrate, observe, then conquer. And for years, that's exactly what he did. But something changes. And this is where people get Omni-Man wrong. They assume that everything he felt on Earth was fake, that his love for Debbie was an act, that raising Mark was part of the mission, that the life he built was just a cover. But if that were true, none of what happens later would make sense. Because when the time comes for Nolan to reveal the truth, he hesitates, not in words, but in actions. If Omni-Man was truly just a Viltrumite soldier with no emotional conflict, the story would have ended the moment Mark got his power. He would have trained him quickly, conditioned him, and taken the planet with overwhelming force. But that's not what happens. Instead, Nolan waits. Years pass, Mark grows up as a human. He builds relationships, he develops a sense of right and wrong that is completely different from Viltrumite ideology. And Nolan knows it. That's not strategy, that's attachment. We see it in the small moments, the way Nolan interacts with Debbie, not as a superior being, but as a husband. The pride he shows when Mark gets his powers, the hesitation in his voice when he finally starts explaining the truth. These aren't the actions of someone who feels nothing. They are the actions of someone who feels too much and doesn't know how to reconcile it. And that conflict explodes in the most brutal way possible. The fight between Omni-Man and Mark isn't just physical, it's ideological. Mark represents everything Nolan has been taught to reject: compassion, empathy, the belief that every life matters. And Nolan tries to break that, not just because it's his mission, but because if Mark is right, then everything Nolan has ever believed in is wrong. That's why the train scene is so important. People see it as proof that Omni-Man is evil. But look closer. He's not just killing people, he's trying to prove a point. He's forcing Mark to experience the fragility of human life, to see how quickly it ends, to understand how insignificant it is compared to their power. You live life for nothing, you die for nothing. That line isn't just directed at humanity, it's something Nolan has been taught his entire life. And in that moment, he's trying to force his son to accept it. But here's the part that people ignore. It doesn't work. Mark doesn't break. He refuses to abandon his humanity, even when he's being beaten to the brink of death. And that's where Nolan starts to lose. Not the fight, the argument. Because for the first time, he's faced with something he can't overpower. A belief, a value system that contradicts everything he is. And it shakes him. You can see it in the way he hesitates before delivering certain blows, in the pauses between his words, in the way his anger feels forced. This isn't a man confidently executing a mission. This is someone trying to convince himself that what he was doing is right. And then we get to the most important moment of the entire fight, when Nolan asks Mark, "What will you have after 500 years? And Mark responds, "You, Dad, I'd still have you." That line breaks him because it forces Nolan to confront something he's been avoiding the entire time. That his connection to Earth wasn't weakness, it was real. If Omni-Man was truly the villain people think he is, that's where Mark dies. That's where the story ends, but it doesn't. Nolan stops. He looks at his son, broken, bloodied, but still holding onto his humanity. And he can't do it. He can't finish the job. And that decision changes everything. Because for the first time in his life, Nolan chooses something other than Viltrumite ideology. He chooses his son. He chooses the part of himself that Earth created. And then he leaves. Not because he lost, but because he no longer knows who he is. That's the truth about Omni-Man that most people miss. He's a man caught between two identities. A conqueror raised to dominate, and a father who learned too late what it means to care. And yes, what he did is unforgivable. The lives he took, the destruction he caused, the trauma he inflicted on his own son. None of that disappears, but understanding Omni-Man isn't about excusing his actions. It's about recognizing the tragedy behind them. Because if you strip away the powers, the alien biology, the scale of destruction, what you are left with is something much more human than people are comfortable admitting. Someone who was raised to believe one thing and then spent years living in a world that taught him another. Someone who didn't realize he had changed until it was too late to undo the change. And that's why nobody understands Omni-Man. Because understanding him, you have to accept that he's not purely evil. He's not purely good either. He's something far more uncomfortable. He's proof that even the worst people can have moments of humanity, and that even those moments don't erase the consequences of what they've done. Omni-Man isn't misunderstood because people don't know what he did. He's misunderstood because people refuse to accept that someone who did all of that could still feel something real. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Invincible isn't trying to give us a villain we can easily hate. Maybe it's trying to show us something harder. That the line between monster and man isn't always as clear as we want it to be. And Omni-Man is standing right in the middle of it.